A few months ago, I finished reading a memoir by the writer Mary Karr, and the title of the memoir is Lit. And I think she used that title, L-I-T, because she writes literature, but also because the memoir talks about how often she was lit, meaning how often she was mainly lit up by drinking way too much booze. And she details in the memoir her struggle with alcohol and how for a long time she denied that it was destroying her life until her marriage collapsed. And then one day she's driving up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She gets into an accident and almost dies. You see, she realized she was in a terrible storm and the boat was capsizing. And it was only because of the car accident that she realized she was powerless to stop herself from drinking. Now, Karr was an atheist, and she had been going to AA, and all her AA friends have been saying, you got to start praying, Mary. You got to start praying to God. You just got to start asking for help. And she thought, this is like praying to Santa Claus. But one day, she became so desperate that in her bathroom, she got down on her knees and in desperation cried out to God for help. And to the shock of this atheist, a great calm came over her, and her desire to drink disappeared. She had discovered the power and presence and freedom of Christ was with her in the boat while she was in the midst of a storm. And by the way, a few years later, she and her son were baptized and became Catholic. Now, life brings us lots of joys and surprises. We had a graduation party at my house yesterday in the midst of that cool air. Life brings births and friendships and vacations and great meals. But it also brings terrible and tragic things to ourselves. We are fragile. We are vulnerable. We get sick. People die. You know, Father's Day was last week. I was thinking my father's been dead 15 years. You know, we have no control over the economy, and people lose jobs. Industries collapse. And we are victims at times of cruelty and greed and injustice that can be between peoples, but it can be because massive industries are engaged in these kinds of activities. But the good news of our faith is that, like Mary Karr, no matter what you're going through, the risen Jesus is in the boat with you. No matter what's happening to you, you can go to him when storms take over your life. And I really want you to appreciate this morning. You know, when Jesus was in that boat and the disciples woke him up, he said, be quiet, be still. He exhibited incredible power. And the winds and the waves quieted down. And I encourage you to read the beginning of Mark's gospel. We're into the end of chapter 4 right now. And it tells one story after another of Jesus being powerful, power over nature. We're going to hear next week how he has power over demons, and then power over illness, and power even over death. You know, Paul tells us at the beginning of Romans, the gospel is the power of God. Paul says in Philippians, I want to know nothing but the power of Christ's resurrection. But I'm sometimes concerned that we can hold false views of the power Jesus displays. We can sometimes think that Jesus' power is like a magic wand, like in Harry Potter. And all of a sudden it will just take away all our problems. It is not like a magic wand. We can sometimes assume that God or Jesus is like some kind of superhero, like Iron Man, who's going to come in like a Marvel Comics character and save us in the last minute. He's going to swoop in and take everything away. And Jesus' power is not like that. His power doesn't dominate. It doesn't control. It doesn't manipulate. You know, and if you do think that God is supposed to be like a superhero, and then you find God doesn't beam in and save you, then you may conclude, well, God is absent. God has no power. You may even stop believing in Him. What you have to stop believing in is that image of God's power. We need a new way of imagining how Jesus' power does, in fact, operate in our world, in our lives. And I'll get to that in a minute. You know, our faith promises that the powerful one is in the boat with us when we go through those storms. But it doesn't promise we won't suffer. It doesn't promise that injustice and terrible things will not happen. Remember, He died on a cross. God didn't stop that. He died on a cross. You know, St. Paul in chapter 13 of 2 Corinthians, he lists some of the things that he endured. Imprisoned, beaten with lashes, 40 lashes 4 times. He was stoned, he was shipwrecked, in constant danger as he traveled. He was hungry, he was thirsty, constantly worried about his churches. But you know, none of those things changed Paul's belief in the presence and power of God, because he knew that it was because Jesus was with him in the boat that he could get through even those terrible things. So yes, life can overwhelm us. Life can sometimes seem to be against us with lots of hard punches. We can be overcome by fear and anxiety and rage. But the gospel keeps reminding us He is with us. At the end of Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, I am with you always. And so I think we have to pray to have faith. I sympathize with the disciples in the gospel today. Would you guys don't have any faith? I'm like, yeah, that's me. I'm sometimes not sure if you're there. So we have to pray to the Spirit for faith to realize He is there with us, whether we know it or not, whether we realize it or not. And when those storms come over you, my friends, like the disciples, turn to Him. Go to Him. Speak to Him. Because you'll start to discover that there is a power and a presence, that Jesus is present and He has a power. And that power can first of all change our interior life. He can free us from our anxiety and our fear. He can bring a great calm and transform our inner life. So many of you over the years have shared with me stories of a family member getting sick, or you've lost a job, or someone has died, and what you've shared with me is that your faith got you through it. What you shared with me was that your faith in Jesus, why you sometimes were sad or grieving or terrified, He would bring you calm. He would give you peace. He would give you strength to get up and keep going. Because He has the power to change our internal life. But He also has the power to change our relationships. So often those relationships are filled with envy and jealousy and resentment and frustration and insecurity. But when we go to the Lord in the midst of the storm, He can change what happens between us. He can start to grow up peace and connection and calm and love and forgiveness. And finally, when you go to the Lord, when you start to tap into His presence and power, you will discover that He can inspire you. He can fill you with new ways of thinking and acting. He can fill you with His creative presence and power and motivation. You see, we are never alone, no matter what we're going through. He's always with us in that boat. We have access to His life, divine life. We have access to His peace. That's why Paul says we are a new creation. So never forget, my friends, He is with you in the boat. Go to Him. Amen.